Well, all this week I've been talking about authority and about the responsibilities that we all have to not only recognize or honor or submit to people who are in positions of authority, but also at the same time to be confident enough in the Word of God, in our relationship with God, to be able to note when an authority is abusing its power and instructing us or saying things that aren't true or aren't of value. And so it just means that we're not people who are just argumentative or we're just pugilistic, because that's not at all what he's talking about. But at the same time, it means that we are able to discern whether something is true or not. Now, the word discernment is the ability to judge something well. And it's, it's the ability to look at something and go, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. And oftentimes things don't make sense because they don't make sense. And that's why when we realize that we're listening to something or hearing something or being told something, and we just sit back and go, wait a minute, that doesn't seem to make any sense to me, that I would not just simply say, well, it must be me, I must be stupid because they're the authority and they know more. I need to follow up with saying, I don't understand what you're saying. For example, I had a gentleman come up to me after a service a couple weeks ago, and he said, you guys were talking about this, about anti-Semitism and how wrong it is, but he says, you kept on referring to anti-Semitism as what you were about instead of what you were against. And as he repeated to me, I thought about it, I thought, you're absolutely right. I misstated, and one of my staff members did the same thing. What we were meant to say is that anti-Semitism is wrong, but we basically, these little pins that we've been passing out, that a little blue square with a hashtag on it, and basically it's a little way of letting people know that you stand with the Jewish people, you stand with Israel, and you think that anti-Semitism is wrong. It's a very simple and passive way of communicating, and if you're interested in getting one, I can let you know how to do that. But just get a hold of us and we'll see if we can get it to you. But the whole point is that if he hadn't asked that question, if he hadn't come up to me and saying, is this what you meant to say? I wouldn't even known that I had misspoken. And so a lot of times we don't speak clearly enough. We don't go into enough detail, and it leaves people with questions. We're imperfect, we're fallible, we make mistakes. The whole point is that for clarification's sake, we should have the freedom also to come and say, I don't understand why you said this or what you mean by that. And if somebody refuses to do that, is unwilling to hear that, then you've got a problem, and maybe they've got a problem. But discernment is that ability to make a distinction between something that's right and something's wrong, and you have to begin with a firm foundation of what is right and true and good. My pastor used to put it really well. He says that if you become well informed of what the genuine is, you'll never be fooled by the counterfeit. And he used the example. He said that in the banking system, they train tellers to identify counterfeit currency by handling genuine currency. In other words, they have to count it out by hand over and over and over again. And the more they do it, the more they begin to develop muscle memory in their fingers, sensory memory. And as soon as they hit a counterfeit currency, they immediately know it. Now, I got past a counterfeit $20 bill one time, and I didn't recognize it was a counterfeit until I took it out of my wallet and I started to hand it to somebody, and I felt it, and then I began to look at it and go, this is a counterfeit. So, my loss, unfortunately. But the simple fact is, I could feel it. I didn't have to look at it. Immediately, as soon as I touched it, I knew it wasn't genuine. And the same thing my pastor used to always say, that if you read the Bible and you study it day after day after day, you become so familiar with the reality, with the true, with that which is actually factual, that when you hear something that isn't true, you'll recognize it immediately. When I was a kid, I went to vacation Bible school with a friend of mine one night. He invited me to go to his church, and I didn't have anything to do, so I didn't even know what to expect. But there was a guy who was talking about the genuine and the false, and he had $2 silver, and you looked at them, and they looked identically the same. He dropped one on the table, and it had this crystalline ring to it, ding, as a silver dollar would sound. And then he dropped the other one on the table, and it just went thud, because it was made out of lead. It looked real, but it was made out of lead. And so he was saying that you can tell whether it has the ring of truth to it or not. Well, if you don't know how truth rings, then you can easily be taken in by something that isn't the truth. And that becomes really the challenge that confronts us all. Being able to discern. How do you discern? You become very familiar with what you're reading. And that's why also it becomes that we really need to think about what is the source of the information that I'm getting, and is it a reliable source? Has it been reliable in the past? I mean, there are certain news agencies, media companies, which I don't listen to very often. Once in a while, I go to check them out to see what they're saying. But they have become really factories of misinformation. They become factories for promoting things that aren't true. And I really try to, when I'm getting a piece of information, something's new, I usually try to find at least 3 sources that I can validate it by before I ever repeat it, because I want to make sure that this is something that's not being just made up, because so much stuff is being made up. And I mean, I've had Christians come to me with things and reporting things, and I'm saying, you know, somehow that doesn't sound true, or doesn't ring true. And when I really go and look into it, I find out it's basically something that is not true. In fact, I don't want to embarrass anybody, but I've had people send me articles from the Babylon Bee, which is a satirical publication. The most reliable, they describe themselves as being the most reliable fake news out there. They just make fun of stuff. But I've had people read those articles, think they were factual, and send them to me, and they're outrageous. And I look at it and go, well, first of all, the source is not reliable. They are not trying to be reliable. They're poking fun at the powers that be. But also you look at the trajectory. If somebody has not been honest in the past, then I have a right to question their honesty going into the future. I mean, many people, you know, I think about our current commander-in-chief. I mean, the man has been called on plagiarizing, and he's basically been a pathological liar his entire life and career. And quite honestly, I don't trust anything the man says, because I can't remember a time that the guy actually told the truth. And so, you know, anything he says, I immediately question. Sometimes it's so obviously untrue that it doesn't take a lot of energy. But he's not the only one that does that. It happens all over from all sorts of sources, and we need, therefore, to be suspicious. And there are certain news agencies like the New York Times, the Washington Post, that I don't give them much credibility anymore, because they have a long history going way back to World War II, where they supported Hitler and they supported the Nazis before the war, and they supported Stalin during the communist era. I just don't rely upon them, because I don't know what their motivation is, but they're not a source that has ever been dependable. They call them the gray old lady, as if she has some kind of stature, but basically it's all reputation without facts behind it. They've relied more on fabrication of pushing an agenda than they have in telling the truth. And that's one of the things I like about the Bible. The Bible isn't trying to push any other agenda than the stated agenda that men ought to fear God and submit their life to Jesus Christ. It's out there in front. And when people argue with me about the Bible, I said, well, you can argue with me about, or tell me that you don't believe it, but you can't tell me it doesn't say what it says. And that's one of the arguments, people saying, well, it's been translated and mistranslated and changed and altered, and you can't rely upon it. We know factually. We know from a textual basis, historical basis, we know from an archaeological basis, that that's absolutely not true, that the biblical text is the most reliable ancient text that we have. And basically what we're reading when we read the Bible is as close to what they wrote in those early centuries, and we can trust that what they're saying is what they said. Now, whether you want to believe what it says is an argument that you have to have with God, because I can't make anybody believe anything. But it's so important that you and I always base our conclusions and our arguments upon what does the Bible say? What is the truth of the Word? And I think in this highly politicized world in which we live, we can get caught up in really becoming enthusiastic about men because they really support a portion or a perspective that we have. The reliable is that only God tells the truth. Only God is always honest. And all men are liars. They may not be lying all the time, like the current commander-in-chief, but all men are liars. And we need to always have a degree of skepticism. Of course, I guess that would include me. So don't believe everything I say. Go to the scriptures and see if it's true. You have a great weekend. God bless you and go in his grace.